Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας. Καλώς ήρθατε στην Αμερικανική Σχολή Κλασικών Σπουδών. Θα συνεχίσω τώρα στα αγγλικά. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, welcome to tonight's event. I'm Natalia Vogekov-Brogan, Director of the Archives of the American School. And tonight's topic is Schliemann. Heinrich Schliemann, the excavator of Troy, Mycenae, and other Homeric sites, was born in Germany on January 6, 1822. January of 1822, Epiphany in Western Europe, and Christmas Day for other countries, including Imperial Russia and Greece, which still used the old Julian calendar until the early 20th century. A compulsive traveler, Schliemann rarely returned to Athens before late December or early January, just in time to celebrate both his birthday and Christmas on January 6th. 2022 marks the bicentennial anniversary of Schliemann's birth, and many institutions in Europe, especially in Germany, will be commemorating this important milestone through a host of activities. The Museum of Prehistory and Early History of the National Museums in Berlin is preparing a major exhibition titled Schliemann's Worlds, which is scheduled to open in May 2022. 2 days ago, I was happy to receive several photos from a group of graduate students at the University of Heidelberg who have put together their own exhibition about Schliemann under the direction of Dr. Polly Lohmann and Professor Stephanie Samida. We had been in touch with them for several months now, guiding their access to the many thousands of digital copies of Schliemann's archive that we have uploaded on the school's webpage. Major German newspapers and TV channels are in the process of producing, or have already produced, lengthy articles and documentaries about Schliemann and his excavations at Troy in anticipation of the bicentennial anniversary, and Antike Welt has published a separate issue, edited by Leonie Hellmeyer, with 11 essays about various aspects of Schliemann's venturesome life. The American School of Classical Studies at Athens, where Heinrich's and Sophia's papers have been housed since 1936, in addition to contributing to all the activities described above, is launching today an online exhibition titled The Stafford Legend, Heinrich Schliemann's Life and Work, showcasing material from the rich Schliemann archive. The exhibition, which has been largely curated by my colleague, historian and archivist, Dr. Eleftheria Dalesiou, she's sitting over there, addresses both lay and scholarly audiences, featuring important aspects of Schliemann's movie-like life. The main goal of this exhibition was to educate and reach out to the lay audience with the help of experts. It is also the first online exhibition of the American School designed as such from the beginning. You will hear more in a moment from Eleftheria about the scope and content of this project. Before that, I would like to highlight that we have added several features to the exhibition in order to make it livelier, such as voice-over passages, or the music that was played in Schliemann's funeral service in Berlin. But most importantly, at Eleftheria's suggestion, we created a series of short podcasts. We have already released 5 of them, and more will soon be available. These podcasts have added another, more personal level of engagement to the Schliemann exhibition by communicating information to the visitor in a more direct way than the exhibition would itself. Because of the rich informational value, we also hope that they will be added to the syllabus of undergraduate classes or graduate seminars about Aegean prehistory. We would like to thank the academics who have already participated in the interviews in order of appearance: Kostas Nikolentsos, Stephanie Kennel, Katja Sporn, Dora Vasilikou, Georgia Flouda, and Jack Davis. As I said, we are planning to interview more people for future podcasts, which will be released in the next few months. Dr. Stephanie Kennel edited the English texts, and Professor Jack Davis contributed to the accuracy of the English translations of Kostas Nikolentsos and Dora Vasilikou's interviews. Tom Brogan lent us his voice in the voice-over texts. Last, but not least, I would like to acknowledge the pivotal contribution of Konstantinos Georginis, the school's digital media manager, to the digital exhibition and the podcasts. Open source content management systems like Joomla, it's the one we used, are great. But this would not have been possible without the skills and energy of our dedicated developer. Now, I pass the baton to Eleftheria, who will navigate you through the exhibition.
As Michaela said, our exhibition began with the desire to commemorate the bicentennial of Heinrich Schliemann's birth. We also thought of it as an opportunity to introduce Schliemann and his archive to a wider audience. Thematically organized, as you will see, into 9 sections, the exhibition covers the entire spectrum of Schliemann's life. From Ankershagen to St. Petersburg, the first section covers his early years in Germany, his adolescence, and his arrival in St. Petersburg as a young agent, where he commenced his successful business. Traveler, the next section, wealthy businessman and traveler. This section follows Schliemann in his business adventures and worldwide travels. The next section is excavator, Schliemann the Excavator. It attempts a concise introduction to his work as an excavator in major prehistoric sites like Troy, of course, and Mycenae. Scholar records his thirst for learning, his passion and aptitude for foreign languages, as well as his meticulous work on the publication of his finds. The next section is family. We called it Family Life Up Close and Personal, and it's a kind of overview of his personal life, his 2 marriages, and the relationship with his children. Sophia, under the title Your Faithful Forever, Sophia. This section is a special homage to his second wife, the Greek wife, Sophia Engastromenou, and attempts to illuminate the woman behind the man. Finale. Schliemann's finale follows closely the last year of Schliemann's life and his tragic end in the streets of Naples. The next section, legacy, through the eyes of others, is the section which deals the way others, biographers and scholars, view the legendary figure of Schliemann. The final section is his archive. I know. The Heinrich Schliemann papers at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens is the final section of the exhibition and follows the story behind the custody of the Schliemann papers from their arrival at the American School in 1936 through the additions of material and the school's efforts to make the papers accessible online to researchers worldwide. Besides the digitized material from our collections, we have added additional features which we hope you will enjoy as you tour the exhibition. There are recorded excerpts from Schliemann's diaries, correspondence, and his autobiographical notes. Here, we would like to listen an excerpt from a letter that Schliemann wrote to his Greek friend, Antonis Amiras, on September 18, 1869, when he was working, when he was actually looking for a Greek woman to marry.
My dearest friend, in my position, all the unmarried girls in Athens, even those of the most distinguished families, daughters of ministers and admirals, would want to come very enthusiastically with me to Paris, having in mind not the value of the man, but only their own future position. In Germany and in France, too, I could find thousands more educated brides. But at my age, it is difficult to find a woman who would marry me, not only for Paris. And since I prefer certainty to uncertainty, I choose Sophia, daughter of an Athenian merchant. She does not have deep scientific knowledge, or speak foreign languages, or play the piano, nor does she have the social graces of Paris. But I will make every effort to educate her and to make a scholar of her, and I'm hopeful that I will succeed because our Greek women are clever and receptive to all cultivation if they have the means and necessary encouragement.
There is more. Finally, there is one more section on the Schliemann microsite. It's under the title Podcasts. Natalia has already talked to you about that. The podcasts were made to accompany the exhibition by offering, we think, a contemporary perspective through interviews with experts in the field of Schliemann studies or readings from his archive. We discussed with our guests issues concerning the history, preservation, and dissemination of the Schliemann papers, the troublesome relationship of Schliemann with Panagiotis Stamatakis, with Dr. Vasilikou. Stamatakis was the archaeologist who was representing the Archaeological Society at Mycenae. The position of Schliemann in the field of Mycenaean archaeology and the various displays of the finds from Mycenae in the National Archaeological Museum, and Schliemann's relationship with the German Archaeological Institute. And we are planning to conduct more interviews in the months to come. I must note here that the podcasts are also available through the school's YouTube channel and via Spotify.
Through the exhibition, which is from today and for the next 2 years available here. You can see the site and you can scan the QR code. Now, it's time to introduce our speaker for tonight. Tonight's speaker, Michaela Zavadil, studied classical archaeology, numismatics, and ancient history at the universities of Vienna and Salzburg. In 2001, she received her PhD in classical archaeology at the University of Salzburg. She has been a research associate at the Austrian Academy of Sciences since 2000, initially at the Mycenaean Commission, and since 2021 at the Austrian Archaeological Institute. In 2003 and 2007, together with Sigrid Degger-Jakolski, she organized and published the proceedings of 2 conferences on late Helladic 3C chronology. And in 2013, she published a monograph titled, in English translation, Studies on Middle and Late Helladic Graves in Messenia. Just last year, she and Birgitta Eder published another collective volume titled Social Place and Space in Early Mycenaean Greece. In addition to her book and the edited volumes I have just mentioned, Michaela has published many articles about Bronze Age Greece. She has also been involved with the Greek-Austrian Synergasia at the site of Pheneos in Corinthia, where she is publishing the Middle Bronze Age pottery. Tonight, we have invited Dr. Zavadil to discuss another of her interests, namely the history of archaeology and especially Heinrich Schliemann. Her work in this area has explored, among others, Schliemann's relationships with colleagues such as Josef Höfler, the Austrian architect who collaborated with Wilhelm Dörpfeld at the excavations in Troy, and the cartographer Major Bernard Steffen. Of course, like many other prehistorians, she has also worried about the scientific integrity of Schliemann's work, and that is what brings her here tonight to share with us her latest thoughts on this particularly important issue. The title of her lecture is Heinrich Schliemann, Yet Again, Why Still Delve into His Biography 200 Years After His Birth? Our lecture tonight is a hybrid lecture, which gives our online viewers the opportunity to participate later with questions and comments. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Michaela Zavadil to the podium.
I would like to thank you very much for the invitation to speak about Heinrich Schliemann at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. I feel very honored to have been given this opportunity on such a special occasion. When I started preparing this lecture, I began to think about where my interest in Schliemann actually comes from. And I think it's my parents' fault. Already as a child, I was interested in archaeology, and one day they gave me the German edition of Irving Stone's The Greek Treasure. I was so fascinated by Schliemann's biography that my mother started looking for a library where his books could be found in Vienna. She came across the Austrian Archaeological Institute, and she went there with her 12-year-old daughter. The librarian was so impressed by my enthusiasm that she let me take some of his books home with me over the weekend. And if someone had told me back then that I would be giving a lecture on Schliemann here in Athens 45 years later, I would not have believed it. So, what is so fascinating about Schliemann that his name is still known to so many people, and not only to archaeologists, 200 years after his birth? Some link his name to the adventurous story of the discovery of the so-called Priam's treasure in Troy, while others accuse him of being a notorious liar. He is either celebrated as a pioneer of contextual archaeology, in the words of Christiane Zinsen, or condemned as a treasure hunter and forger. His contemporaries also saw Schliemann in diverse ways. Some scholars regarded him and his excavations with skepticism. Let me only quote the well-known statement by Adolf Furtwängler, who wrote that Schliemann was, I quote, a half-crazy and confused person who has no idea of the actual significance of his excavations and really only expends all his truly astonishing energy because of his minor interest in the things being so old and originating from Troy and Mycenae. However, in the very same letter written to his mother in the summer of 1881, Furtwängler added, "But because of that, he has been of enormous service to our discipline." But Schliemann also had important supporters in Germany. First and foremost, the famous pathologist, prehistorian, and politician Rudolf Virchow. In his preface to Schliemann's book Ilios, we read, I quote, "I recognize my duty to bear witness to the crowd of doubters who, for better or worse, have not grown tired of criticizing the reliability of both the findings and their interpretation." What I have just said is not at all new. Already in 1998, Donald Easton expressed similar thoughts in his article, Heinrich Schliemann, Hero or Fraud. It seems, therefore, that after so many years, we still have not found satisfying explanations for the Schliemann phenomenon. And this fact is perhaps partly responsible for why Schliemann's life still interests many of us so much. But is that all? I think there is more to be gleaned from his biography than whether and how much he lied. Who was this Johann Ludwig Heinrich Julius Schliemann? Where did he come from? Heinrich was born the son of a Lutheran pastor on January 6, 1822, in Neubuckow, in the then Grand Duchy of Mecklenburg-Schwerin in northern Germany. Having grown up in dismal family circumstances, he had to abandon the school career he had started at the gymnasium after only 3 months. He then attended a Realschule and completed an apprenticeship as a grocer. After unsuccessful attempts to find work, not yet 20 years of age, he decided to go to South America. After that plan failed, because the vessel was shipwrecked near the Dutch coast, Schliemann decided instead to go to Amsterdam, where he worked for various trading houses in the years that followed. In 1846, Schliemann was 24. His then employer, the trading house Schröder & Company, sent him to St. Petersburg as their sales representative. Only a year later, he founded his own trading house, acquired Russian citizenship, and within a few years became one of the richest merchants in St. Petersburg. At the age of 30, he married Ekaterina Lishina. They had 3 children, Sergei, Natalia, and Nadezhda. Schliemann lived in Russia for 18 years. 2 major journeys, one to America and one to Europe and the Levant, interrupted this stay. In 1864, at the age of 42, he liquidated his trading house and went on a journey around the world, which was to last 2 years, leaving his family in Russia. After his return, he settled in Paris and started attending lectures at the Sorbonne, among them lectures in archaeology and philology. While still in Russia, he had already begun to learn modern and ancient Greek and had started studying ancient authors. In 1868, another journey took him via Greece to Turkey. There he made a stop in the Troad to search for Troy. returning to the Dardanelles, he by chance met Frank Calvert, who directed his interest to Hisarlik. Having met Frank, Schliemann was convinced that Troy had been there. After returning to Paris, he wrote his first archaeological publication, Ithaque, le Péloponnèse, Troie, Recherche archéologique. In the following year, 1869, a 47-year-old Schliemann radically changed his life. He traveled to the USA in March to acquire American citizenship, something that made it easier for him to divorce Ekaterina. He submitted Ithaque, le Péloponnèse, Troie to the University of Rostock as his doctoral thesis, and in April was awarded a degree in absentia. In September, he married 17-year-old Sophia Engerstromenu in Athens. 2 children were born to them, Andromache and Agamemnon. And now, I will cut a long story short. In the remaining 21 years of his life, Schliemann carried out excavations not only in Troy, but also in Mycenae, Orchomenos, Marathon, Tiryns, and, which is much less well known, also in Messenia, on the citadel of Paleocastro, as well as in the cave of Nestor near modern Pylos. In the cave, he found pottery fragments, which he compared with sherds he had excavated at Mycenae. Thus, Schliemann was probably the first to identify relics of the Mycenaean period in this area. As an archaeologist, I would like to focus on the role that Schliemann played, or did not play, in the development of our field. One often reads that he was, I quote, the father of prehistoric Greek archaeology. One of the contributors to the catalogue of a major exhibition on Mycenaean culture a few years ago referred to him as the popular founder of archaeology as a research with a spade. Such an attribution is not at all new. The pioneer British Assyriologist Archibald Sayce had used a similar expression already in 1884 in his preface to Schliemann's book Troja, results of the latest researches and discoveries on the site of Homer's Troy. But what really were Schliemann's contributions to archaeology? I believe it is important to consider 2 things when seeking an answer. First, did Schliemann change the way he carried out an excavation in the 23 years he was doing archaeological work, that is, between 1868 and 1890? And second, how did Schliemann's working methods compare with those contemporary excavations conducted by others? Heinrich Schliemann conducted his first dig, assisted by 1 and then 4 workers, on Ithaca, on the summit of Mount Athos, on 13th and 14th July 1868. Guided by Homer and John Murray's Handbook for Travelers in Greece, he wanted to excavate the palace of Odysseus, long been suspected to be there, as this plan by William Gell from 1807 shows. To his disappointment, Schliemann found no evidence of a palace. He described his discoveries as 3 cisterns and remains of a building or tower from the post-Homeric period, ruins which had already been described by travelers before him, as you can see by this drawing of Karl Haller von Hallerstein. Furthermore, Schliemann excavated some cremation burials. He regretfully noted in his diary that they had worked far too impatiently, causing many completely preserved vases to break. Schliemann tried to establish a date for the burials by comparing the pottery with vases from Cumae that he had seen in the museum in Naples. No plan of this excavation exists. Schliemann probably took some of the finds with him, but never published them. In 1870-71, he carried out his 2 first excavations in Troy. I think that I do not need to emphasize that the first and very brief one was illegal. During the second excavation, Schliemann dug in 2 areas, on the plateau and slope of the hill and at its bottom. He was in charge of overseeing up to 83 workers and took care of the registration of the finds by himself. Soon he began compiling his entries in the diary for reports, mainly for the Augsburger Allgemeine Zeitung and the Athenian Ephemeris Tonsicidicium. He continued to do so also during his later excavations, but then he sent the reports mainly to the London Times. Certainly, his presence in the print media had contributed to his fame already during his lifetime, as Stefanie Samida has shown. And I think that the impression that he gave of himself then, but also of archaeology, still lingers today and influences the opinion of many. But let us return to Troy. By the end of the campaign of 1871, Schliemann had excavated the colossal ruins of about 10 meters in depth, which he associated with Homer's Troy. Based on the results of his first two campaigns, Schliemann planned to have a large part of the tell removed in 1872. However, this proved to be impossible, and so he confined himself to creating a very wide and deep trench, which is known to archaeologists as Schliemann's Trench. The pace at which he had it excavated often prevented the locations of finds to be precisely recorded, as he himself regretfully noted in a letter to Émile Bournouf, the director of the French school at Athens. That year, Schliemann made a couple of changes to his approach to archaeology. For the first time, he hired 3 foremen to help him in overseeing his, by now, 120 workmen. The railway workers Theodoros Makris and Spiridon Dimitriou, as well as the miner Yorgos Fotidas. When the dig began, the engineer Adolphe Laurent visited the site and made a plan of the tell and the old excavation areas. And Schliemann changed the nature of entries in his diary. While he had previously limited himself to verbal descriptions, he now supplemented them with sketches of finds. Perhaps following advice from Bournouf, he also indicated the depths of the finds. However, finds and findings were still not well documented, even by the standards of the time. After finishing work for 1872, he hired the surveyor Sisylas to draw a new plan. Emil Siebrecht, a photographer living at the Dardanelles, took 12 pictures of the site and its surroundings, and the Athenian photographer Panaros Zafiropoulos made photos of the finds. These were not the first pictures Schliemann had commissioned in connection with his excavations. After the end of the campaign in 1871, he had already sent photos of some finds to Ernst Curtius. For the next campaign in 1873, Schliemann hired the artist Polychronis Lembesis, who later became a well-known painter. Lembesis was now responsible for drawing important finds, and you can see the change in the quality of the drawings in Schliemann's diary. But it was not until the end of the season that Schliemann again hired Adolphe Laurent to prepare new plans. Back in Athens, he again had Zafiropoulos taking pictures of drawings, plans, and artifacts. 217 photos, some of very poor quality, were then published in Schliemann's first book on the excavations of Troy, the Atlas Trojanischer Altertümer. Despite his hasty progress, and certainly with the support of Frank Calvert, Schliemann soon understood the basic features of the settlement sequence in Troy, even if he was completely wrong about its absolute date. He refined the stratigraphy during and after the excavation of 1879, together with Émile Bournouf, the director of the French school at Athens, and the prehistorian and anthropologist Rudolf Virchow. Virchow not only helped Schliemann in archaeological matters, but also studied carbonized grains and human skeletons found in Troy. As early as 1872-73, Schliemann sought cooperation with experts from other fields. The chemist and professor at the University of Athens, Xaver Landerer, measured the silver content of objects from Priam's treasure and analyzed the composition of glass beads and of clay and paint of pottery sherds. Later, Schliemann expanded this interdisciplinary approach considerably. The London metallurgist John Percy analyzed gold silver and bronze finds from Mycenae. The numismatists Friedrich Imhof Blumer and Achilles Postolakis dealt with Trojan coins, and the amber specialist Otto Helm examined beads from Mycenae and identified them as imports from the Baltics. As we will see later, such interdisciplinary work was already quite common at the time among archaeologists working in Greece. The Expédition Scientifique de Morée, whose members were already dedicated to archaeology and the natural sciences in the 1830s, might be seen as a forerunner of this working method. When talking about Schliemann's finds, it is important to emphasize that he had already understood the significance of pottery when he made his first excavation. Already on Ithaca, he had tried to determine a relative date for the graves he found on the basis of pottery. Certainly, however, the guidance he later received on this topic from Calvert, Burnouf, and others must not be ignored. Whereas there are hardly any reports from contemporaries who took part in Schliemann's early excavations, this is not the case for his work in Mycenae in 1876. Panayotis Stamatakis, who had carried out excavations on behalf of the Greek Archaeological Service at least since 1871, supervised Schliemann's work. He was not only the official representative of the Greek Archaeological Service, but also of the Archaeological Society at Athens, because the permit to excavate at Mycenae had been granted to the society. Schliemann carried out the dig at his own expense, but for the society. Stamatakis did not give Schliemann a good evaluation as an excavator. Against the will of Stamatakis, digging was carried out in several areas at the same time, with up to 130 workmen, who were paid according to the number of cubic meters they excavated. Walls that were not prehistoric were not documented and destroyed, and Schliemann discarded pottery that was not prehistoric. But in return, Schliemann accused Stamatakis of doing the same with prehistoric pottery. Schliemann made hardly any drawings of finds and no sketches of any features during the excavation. Stamatakis, on the other hand, drew sketches of the graves. They are the only drawings that show the find contexts from grave circle A. As in Troy, Schliemann only hired an engineer towards the end of the campaign. Vasilios Drosinos from Nafplion was responsible for drawing plans and sections. Throughout the excavation, Konstantinos Athanasiou took a few general photos. After the dig had come to an end, Panayotis Chrysaitis photographed the site, and the famous brothers Aristotelis and Konstantinos Romaidis took pictures of the finds. In 1882, Schliemann made a fundamental change in the way he conducted his excavations. Encouraged by Richard Schöne, the director of the Royal Museums in Berlin, he employed for the first time 2 architects during the entire season. The Austrian Josef Höfler and the German Wilhelm Dörpfeld came to Troy. Höfler had just completed his studies, while Dörpfeld, who was slightly older, had been a staff member and technical director of the excavations in Olympia. He had gained experience there, which he was now going to apply in Troy. Dörpfeld was joined by 2 of the foremen who had participated in the excavations at Olympia, Yorgos Paraskevopoulos and Grigorios Vasilopoulos. Over time, Schliemann seems increasingly to have made decisions about how to proceed with the excavation in collaboration with his architects. Sadly, from this campaign, neither Schliemann's copybook nor his diary have survived. All the more interesting is Josef Höfler's Trojan diary, which only surfaced some years ago and is not yet published. From then on, Schliemann carried out almost all excavations in collaboration with Wilhelm Dörpfeld, or had Dörpfeld direct them alone. During the last years of Schliemann's life, decisions on how to dig and where increasingly rested on Dörpfeld. After this brief overview of Schliemann's largest excavations, which he carried out before Dörpfeld became his collaborator, I would like now to draw your attention to some excavations in the Aegean that took place at about the same time. And I will start with Austrian research. In 1873 and 75, the archaeologist Alexander Conze carried out excavations on Samothrace, which were funded by the Imperial and Royal Ministry of Culture and Education. His team comprised the archaeologist Otto Bendorf, the architects Alois Hauser and George Niemann, the geologist Rudolf Hörnes, and the court photographer Wilhelm Burger. This excavation is certainly one of the earliest in the Mediterranean for which photographs were taken during the entire campaign. Rudolf Hörnes not only devoted himself to exploring the geological structure of the island, but also contributed a study of the building material used, not confining himself to ancient ruins, but also examining medieval and recent buildings. Conze's main objective was to produce a graphical reconstruction of the buildings at the site and the area under study, by precisely surveying the site and by studying architectural elements and building techniques. To my knowledge, no observations were made on the stratigraphy. Small finds and pottery were collected and at least partly kept. Only a very small amount was published, namely what you see on the slide. A week and a half after the close of Conze's second season, the long-planned excavations of Olympia by the German Empire began on October 4, 1875, under the joint direction of the archaeologist Ernst Curtius and the architect Friedrich Adler. Already planned in 1853, its actual start had been considerably delayed. But even as early as 1853, guided by Pausanias' description of Olympia, plans had been made about how to carry out the excavation. I quote, "Starting from the temple, test trenches will be dug in all significant places." This approach was adopted for the excavations, which lasted until 1881 and were under the technical direction of Wilhelm Dörpfeld after 1878. I think that this excavation, the funding of which was impressive, has to be considered one of the best of its time for several reasons. Although its focus lay clearly on the investigation of classical Olympia, care was taken for more recent findings. The Byzantine settlement, which was discovered to everyone's surprise, was recorded. Stratigraphy was observed and described in the diaries as well as recorded in drawings. Particularly important finds, such as the pedimental sculptures of the Temple of Zeus, were located on plans. The participants in the excavations took photos, one of them being Wilhelm Dörpfeld. Apart from this, as did Schliemann in Mycenae, the Romaidis brothers and other photographers took pictures towards the end of each season. Adolf Furtwängler published the small finds and the pottery. He also had the Berlin chemist August Wilhelm von Hoffmann carry out chemical analysis of some of the metal finds. You may already have wondered about something now. The excavations I've selected as comparisons for Schliemann's work relate to sites of the archaic, classical, and Hellenistic periods, and not the prehistoric era. The reason for this is that I was looking for excavations comparable in size to those of Schliemann. Those that met this requirement did not include prehistoric sites. This in turn reflects the fact that remains of the classical antiquity have been of interest since the Middle Ages and of course especially the Renaissance. Classical archaeology had established as an academic field in large parts of Europe around the middle of the 18th century. It was closely linked to philology and had developed mainly as a history of classical art. This differs considerably from the scholarly interest in prehistory, which only emerged in the course of the 19th century, no doubt fueled, among other factors, by the discovery of the lake dwellings in Switzerland in 1854. Then, research in prehistory was strongly linked to geology and anthropology, not least because there were no written sources to consult. Perhaps one element that made Schliemann's research so incredibly exciting for his contemporaries was that suddenly, by drawing on Homer, there seemed to be a written source for prehistory. Geology in particular provided the impetus for various methods used in excavations. Just think of the relative chronology based on stratigraphy and the then common use of the term Leitfossilien, index fossils, for chronologically relevant objects. Of course, there were excavations of prehistoric sites before Schliemann. We know nothing about most of them, but the fact that they took place is proven by numerous private collections of antiquities that contained prehistoric finds. I would like to mention briefly in this context a man who could have become very important for Greek prehistory as early as the late 1830s, if he had published more of his archaeological research. The Scottish Philhellene, historian, antiquarian, and collector of not only prehistoric artifacts, George Finlay. It is little known that he also carried out few excavations, as for example, he did in 1837 in a Middle Helladic tumulus near Aphidnes, the results of which remained unpublished. Let us move on to excavations that have been published. In 1831, the poet, politician, and later professor for archaeology at the University of Athens, Alexandros Rhizos Rangavis, the diplomat Konstantinos Chinas, the German classical philologist Friedrich Thiersch, and the architect Eduard Metzger conducted excavations at the treasury of Atreus at Mycenae and on the upper citadel of Pyrins. Each dig lasted 1 day. Metzger made some drawings that were published by Thiersch in a long paper dedicated to the Erechtheion. In it, he also set out his view on the origins of Greek architecture, which he supported with his work in Mycenae and Pyrins. However, Thiersch did not give any further thought to the age of what they had found. For him, it was just Pelasgian, so very old. But let me turn now to research at prehistoric sites that was carried out at roughly the same time as that of Schliemann. Digs which brought to light prehistoric remains took place in 1861 at Chalandriani on Syros. While staying on the island for a few days, the teacher Grigorios Papadopoulos heard about tombs found in the north of the island. Papadopoulos went there, saw that the number of tombs was very large, inspected the ones that had already been opened, and excavated some others. He described them, the burials and the grave goods, in some detail. Papadopoulos concluded that they were tombs of political prisoners of the Romans, who had been deported to nearby Iaros. After returning to Athens, Papadopoulos handed over about 30 vases to the Museum of the Archaeological Society. 12 years later, in 1873, the medical student Klon Stephanos carried out excavations at Chalandriani with the financial support of the Archaeological Society. He correctly identified the graves as prehistoric. So far as I know, this is the only drawing that records anything from this dig. Excavations which brought to light prehistoric finds that were immediately recognized as such took place on 2 other islands, Thiracia and Thera. I will only outline the course of events here, basing myself on the research of Iris Zahili and her team, who published them in full detail. Workmen mining for pumice had discovered ancient building remains on Thiracia, which were then excavated by the owner of the quarry, Siguras Alafusos and his son, of whom I have no photos to show you. They were supported by the Santorini physicians and antiquarians Nikolaos Nomikos and Iosif de Girala, or in Italian, Giuseppe de Girala. The group uncovered remains of 2 buildings during 2 digs in autumn 1866, each of which lasted a few days. They produced a cross-section showing the location of the site as well as a plan, and described the well-preserved inventory of finds in these rooms in detail. I think that the reason for this quite accurate recording of the site is that the excavations were carried out by persons who were familiar with mining and who applied that knowledge to the dig. Nomikos and Alafusos incorporated the objects they found into their collections. Based on the fact that they had not discovered any metal objects, they dated their discoveries to the Stone Age. Nomikos and Dekirala sent reports to Greek newspapers and to the archaeologist François Lenormand, who not only translated them into French, but also attempted a scholarly interpretation of the new findings. Dekirala was not only in touch with Lenormand, but also with Johann Georg von Hahn, the Austro-Hungarian consul on Syros. In 1866, von Hahn had traveled to Santorini together with the photographer Paul de Grange to observe the eruption of the volcano. Dekirala sent von Hahn a report on their research, which the latter translated into German. He then forwarded it to the Imperial Academy of Sciences in Vienna, together with organic finds from the excavation and some photos, including one showing the site. Apart from these, de Grange also took photos of some of the finds, which were then published as engravings. The geologist Ferdinand Fouquet, who had visited the islands to study the volcanic eruption in 1866, resumed the dig in the following year. Whereas the first excavators had cleared the interior of the house, he uncovered its exterior to investigate the stratigraphy outside of the building. He drew a new plan and described the finds from the old and new excavations in greater detail. Fouquet also carried out excavations at Akrotiri on Thera and, based on his observations of the geological layers, concluded that both sites had existed at the same time. Owing to the lack of metal finds, he also decided that the sites should be dated to the Stone Age. However, Fouquet had to revise that idea a few years later, when a copper saw was found on Santorini in a Stone Age layer during renewed excavations by the French school at Athens. I personally find the very modern way in which Fouquet dealt with the pottery far more exciting than the issue of chronology. Not only did he describe the pottery in detail, but he also grouped it according to microscopic criteria. He then prepared thin sections and carried out petrographic analysis to determine the origin of the pots. Fouquet did not conduct this kind of research only on pottery from Santorini. Albert Dumont, the director of the French school at Athens, gave him a fragment of a vessel that had been found at Mycenae. Its microscopic examination suggested to Fouquet that it had originated from Santorini. He also noticed that other vessels from Mycenae had been made from a different clay and, therefore, had to have come from somewhere else. In the 70s and 80s of the 19th century, the number of excavations of prehistoric sites in Greece increased considerably. In 1877, Panayotis Stamatakis explored the chamber tombs of Sparta. Ernst Ziller provided plans. The chemist Xavalanderer analyzed the bone finds and the glass beads. 1878, Stamatakis excavated the Tolos tomb at the Argive Heraion. Both digs were carried out on behalf of the Archaeological Society. In the same year, Euthemius Kastorchis and Yannis Kondakis undertook the first excavations of the chamber tombs in Nafplion. In this case, Vasilios Vrosinos recorded the tombs. Work there was continued 1880 by Kondakis and after him by Harburg Gerhard Lolling on behalf of the German Archaeological Institute. When mentioning Lolling, one must not forget the Tolos of Menidi, which he had explored jointly with Stamatakis in 1879. And last but not least, Minos Kalokarinos had already conducted his excavations at Knossos in 1878. I could continue in this way for a while longer, but I think what I've already said suffices to show the trend. And I'm personally curious if Schliemann's excavations had been the trigger for this increase in prehistoric exploration, but I'm not certain. I would like now to return to the questions I asked in the beginning of my presentation. Is it reasonable to refer to Schliemann as the father of prehistoric Greek archaeology? What role did he play in the development of our field? There is no doubt that with the passage of time, Schliemann developed from an inexperienced excavator into a genuine archaeologist. But many of the achievements commonly attributed to him had been considered or accomplished by others before Schliemann. Already in 1853, Curtius had proposed to use test trenches in his concept for the excavations of Olympia. In 1859, Frank Calvert had made a test trench at Hanaitepe that ran from the edge of the tell towards its center. Schliemann's great trench in Troy was dug many years after that. Neither was Schliemann in 1871-72 the first to use photography to record his excavations and finds. Apart from archaeological research in Egypt and the Middle East, where photos were taken as early as the mid-19th century, I would like to refer to Charles Newton, who documented his work at the mausoleum of Halicarnassus with photographs. For technical reasons, all these photos were published as engravings or lithographs. The same applies to the pictures taken by Paul de Grange in 1866 of the finds from Thirasea. Schliemann, on the other hand, used original photographs that were glued into his atlas Trojanische Altertümer, published in 1874. This means that Zafiropoulos produced about 100,000 prints of photos for this book, which appeared in about 500 copies. When Conze published his research on Samothrace a year later, the plates were produced using the then new and cheaper collotype printing process. Schliemann was not the first to excavate prehistoric sites in Greece, and he was not the first to recognize the importance of stratigraphy. But, and this is important, he was very good at choosing the sites where he excavated, or wanted to excavate. Just think of Olympia and Knossos. He could not and cannot be ignored because of the sites themselves and because of the finds he made at them. I think this is one of the factors that make him such an important figure, not only for Greek prehistory, but for archaeology. Regarding the objects that he found, it deserves mention that he paid attention to finds that were then usually considered to be of little importance, such as pottery or small finds. I'm thinking, for example, of the 14 plates showing spindle whorls in the Atlas Trojanische Altertümer. Considering all this, I see him as one of the many fathers of prehistoric archaeology in Greece. Allow me to conclude with a few thoughts about the future of Schliemann research. As an archaeologist, I focused, as many before me, on trying to define Schliemann's role within archaeology. But I think that it is a pity that his rich legacy has as yet hardly been exploited for research on other topics. We always should have in mind the great corpus of Schliemann's correspondence, but his legacy encompasses much more than that. There are his travel diaries in about 10 languages. There are financial documents such as receipts, invoices, books of expenses, and various banking records, the analysis of which, in combination with his correspondence, can certainly contribute to our knowledge of his career as a businessman. Apart from that, I believe that these documents could also provide us with new insights into the economic history of Russia in the middle of the 19th century. In respect to economic history, I would also like to refer to Schliemann's correspondence with his publishers, Eduard Brockhaus and John Murray. Its publication is overdue and promises detailed insights into the 19th century publishing industry. Another important area of research includes the sources for Schliemann in Greek and Turkish archives. With the exception of the work done by Dora Vasilikou, Kostas Paschalidis, Lena Papazoglou, Maniudaki, and Rüstem Aslan, they have received little attention so far. Last but not least, I would like to emphasize that even 200 years after his birth, there is still no, let's say, modern, comprehensive biography of Schliemann that treats his entire life, avoiding a focus on specific topics. If we ever have such a work, the deadlocked, often one-sided opinions that many have about Schliemann will hopefully be set straight. He was neither criminal nor a saint. He was, like all of us, the product of both his circumstances and the area in which he lived. Thank you.
Michaela, thank you very much for this excellent presentation, for contextualizing Schliemann's excavations, for tracing his development as an archaeologist. We realized that he improved. That's very interesting. That you compared, what was available at the time. If there were other prototypes, other methodology that you could have followed. They were all pioneers, and they were all paving the way.
Yeah.
And they made mistakes.
Yes.
And I think it's easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to judge them. And now I would like to, and one more thing. You said, I agree completely with you that we were in desperate need of a biography of Schliemann, one of these large biographies that historians produce. We still don't know much, and I showed books about Schliemann keep being published, but they just, these books that are, they take his life from the beginning to the end, they rarely provide new information. They just go back to the same, most of them draw their sources from Ludwig and Meyer. We also need a biography of Sophia Schliemann.
Yeah.
We know very little. We know what, again, and especially from the years, Sophia Schliemann after the death of Schliemann, after 1890. We don't know much about her. We need a biography. So now, there are questions already here, but I'll ask the audience, the live audience here, if there are any questions that you would like to address to Dr. Zavadil. Yes?
I know you're probably not a writer.
We'll give you the microphone in a second.
I know you're not a writer to write a biography, but you've obviously got a lot of knowledge. Did you not think of putting your own documents together and try to sort of write a biography?
No. No, because I'm not only working on Schliemann. Being an archaeologist, I'm also responsible for publishing pottery. And I think if someone wants to write Schliemann's biography and do him justice, he has to focus only on this. And it's an enormous work.
I see. You said before that people keep writing biographies, but they keep going over the same ground.
That's true.
Is it because they can't find any other information?
And
where would they find it?
As Michaela said, the archive is first. The archive is very rich. It's more than 100,000 documents. A lot of it is already, uploaded on the web. As Michaela said, to write a biography of, a definite biography, you need to spend years. From what I understand, at least in American academia or departments of archaeology, you won't get a tenure or won't get a promotion for writing a biography of somebody. You will do it after you are a full professor, or, you know. So it needs time. It doesn't advance your career, unlike historians, you know, who writing a biography of an important person is, you know, it's considered something very good and productive. So other problems is that first, it's a very rich archive to go through. Many languages. It's written in many languages. For example, if you want to cover his earlier life, you need to know Russian, for example, you know, good Russian, German, French, Greek, Turkish. So I think you have to have a team around you in order to produce a biography, and I think that's the challenge. I don't know if Michaela wants to share with you, but they would like to do some indexing where you are, you know, working, and maybe say a couple words of what, you know.
Together with Professor Carlsen from the University of Rostock, Tobias Mühlenbruch, Stefanie Samida and I have submitted a project for indexing mainly Schliemann's letters, but also his diaries, so that further research will be facilitated if someone wants to focus on, I don't know, Schliemann's work as a merchant concerning indigo. He can search for indigo and get a list which letters, which documents from Schliemann refer to this topic.
Most of Schliemann's correspondence, except for what has been published by Meyer and other researchers, needs to be transcribed. It's very difficult to, you know, that's I think the groundbreaking work. You need to transcribe in order to read or do work that Michaela is proposing, like, you know, text mining. That's what we want to do. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much. Other questions? Yes, Stephanie Kennel, please.
Thank you very much, Michaela, for your lecture tonight. I am very happy to have been able to watch and listen to your treatment of Schliemann, which was both very sympathetic and very comprehensive in terms of recognizing the problems in dealing with him biographically and in considering him as an archaeologist. I very much appreciated your comparison of what he was doing in the 1860s, 1870s to what other people were doing in archaeological projects, both in the classical period and in prehistory. We all have to remember that in this period, prehistoric archaeology did not exist. You could not go to university and study it. You could not learn. In fact, archaeology as a discipline did not exist. You could not go to university and learn how to excavate and what good excavation practice was and what you should be looking for and how you should dig. And this is the modern yardstick against which he is measured, and always unfairly. I also thank you for raising the biographical issue, that if one wants to talk about him as an entire person, one needs to cover the entire archive and all aspects of his life, because he did have quite a lot of life before he became an archaeologist. And this is why I welcome your approach to Schliemann as Natalia as requiring a team, because the polyglossia of his well, I'll say it in German, Nachlass, of his papers, requires a whole lot of talents, both linguistically and in terms of discipline. You need to know about not just archaeology and the history of 19th century Germany, but you need to know about economic history, you need to know about colonialism, you need to know about trade, you need to know about Russian history, you need to know about Greek history. There are a lot of issues that his life brings up, and there are things that he really cares about, and things that he, if you just look at his correspondence, things that he just doesn't really seem to notice. And so I applaud your announcement that people want to index his correspondence by subject. What I would like to ask is how you think we are to approach the elephant that is Schliemann as blind persons. That we're always, all of us with our specialities can recognize parts of him. We can recognize the archaeological part, or we can recognize the Heimat, the homeland part, or the world traveler part. But how can we put them all together?
I think this will be one of the great challenges for the person who hopefully will write his biography, to put all these different, let's say, persons we know from Schliemann together to create a complete picture of him. And I think it's tremendous difficult work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. Because you're right. You and Natalia are completely right about the continuing publications about him always seem to come back to the same subjects over and over again, and that is because, as I have pointed out in various publications, that people just stick with what's been published, and that's an incredibly small selection of the 60,000 plus outgoing incoming letters, and the 25,000 plus incoming, 25,000 plus outgoing letters, despite the things that Ernst Mayr, his so-called biographer and publisher, took away, and also the missing excavation diary. So we. People need to look at, people need to be less lazy, and they need to look at what the American School has actually put on the web as digital resources. That's all I have to say right now. Thank you very much
for your comments. We have a couple comments here online. Konstantina Zanu, thank you so much for this exciting lecture. You mentioned that in 1872 his finds were not adequately reported, even according to the standards of the time. How do you understand the standards of the time? What were the contemporary professional models you compare Schliemann practices with? Who was the professional archaeologist back then who would offer the standards of the discipline? I think you have, dealt with most of it during your lecture.
Hopefully, yes. Well, I think
that was the topic of, the main.
Yes, but as Stephanie said, there was no, let's say, art of how to make an excavation back then, because, as you said, they were all pioneers. So I think the excavations that were made in Olympia were you could see them as the standard of the time.
That was the standard, but as you said, it was a classical excavation also. There is a little There is a question here. I don't know if we know the answer. You said that Schliemann paid workers at Mycenae depending on how much earth they dug up. Was this common practice among other excavator archaeologists of the time? The person, Rush Rem, says it sounds suspiciously like digging for treasure. I don't know.
To be honest, I don't know if it was the same at other excavations.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I don't know.
Square meter.
Mm-hmm.
And one last question. Fletcher Erskine, greetings from Scotland, and thank you for your presentation. What is your favorite of Schliemann's findings and why?
Well, I like a lot the small pot I've shown, and that's the reason why I showed it. Well, I don't know if we can go. Which he found at Mycenae. Because it's from the early Mycenaean period, and I'm working this one with early Mycenaean pottery.
One last comment from me is I was fascinated by those thin sections or of the petrologists.
Yes,
I mean,
I didn't know this before I started preparing the lecture, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I.
Can we have the microphone here, Georgia.
And I don't know if anybody between Fouquet and I don't know when petrography started in the 20th century, but I don't know if anybody in between worked on petrography. But after Fouquet and before research started, I don't know, in the 60s.
Theoretically, I should know this, but to be honest,
can you move just your for a second?
Sorry. I don't know concerning your comment now, but I'm wondering, theoretically, I should know also this one, but I'm wondering, do you remember, so the slide you showed, do you remember from the publication, these are photos, these are drawings?
I don't
this
know.
Is something in between? I mean, it's really...
I don't know, and Fouquet doesn't give any information. So where are they? Here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blue color.
It needs to be.
The blue color. It shouldn't be like this. If this was a photo, so I'm wondering.
But
if it's a drawing or...
You need to write a paper, study them and write a paper.
Theoretically, I should know this because I'm working on the area, but I really don't know. And I think I had a discussion with a colleague in the past about this, if it's a photo, a drawing, or... And finally we say, okay, we don't know exactly, but they are really interesting in any case.
But if I think of the equipment a photographer had back then, I cannot imagine that he made a photo during the lens of a microscope.
No, okay.
But I don't know.
Well, thank you very much, Michaela, for your talk. There is a smaller reception downstairs. Konstantinos, can we go to the last two slides? Should I go? Okay, this is, if you have time, there is the horse show, the big exhibition that the American School is having at the Makrigiannis Wing. Tonight, it's open until 10. So if you have time, you know, you can go just across the gardens to the Makrigiannis Wing to see this wonderful show that Jennifer Niles has curated. And in a week from now, there will be another lecture here at Kotzen Hall by Glenn Bew, Reflections on the Athenian Cavalry. So join us downstairs. Thank you very much for coming.
in D major.